I also came through Jack and Jill as a young man. I grew up in Colorado, and it was really important. I think the mission of Jack and Jill was really important in a place like Colorado, where you don't have as much diversity, and you kind of have to get similarly situated children around each other to sort of learn the things that you all are teaching your children now. I listened with great delight with Ashton talking about my legal career, and that's because you hit early 50s and then you hit that midlife crisis and I'm off actually doing something else. And we still have the law firm. If you have driven by Dycan Park, you've probably seen the billboard and all that stuff. We've got a very active practice, but I began to get passionate about other things. What I wanted was, because I knew after my son gets a lot older, he's not going to want to start digging around legal files to figure out what his dad does every day. And I decided what was important for me as a dad would be to leave something he can look at when I'm gone. And therein was born what I'm going to call the Riverside Project. If any of you are familiar with where HEB is, you know where the HEB on South McGregor is, well, I bought our existing law office back in almost 20 years ago, back in 2007. And the idea was if one kid walked by that office and decided that going to law school and becoming a lawyer was a good thing, then we have served our purpose. That was the point. At that time, I had been officing in River Oaks. I was living in the River Oaks area, and I was quite happy, to be honest with you. And my mentor came and knocked on my door and said, hey man, I think I've got a great building that we can buy and put our practices in. And I went over there out of respect for him, but in the back of my mind, I was saying, no way. I'm leaving that side of town to come over here. Just, where do you go get coffee? Where do you sit down and have a real nice lunch? And, don't get me wrong, I love Frenchies, I love Ray's, I love all the stuff that we have over here, but these were my questions. I walked into that house and immediately fell in love. And from that point, it's been a true passion. Around that time, my son was coming along. This was June of 2007. In 2009, I decided that I want to run for Congress. And so I ran for the 18th Congressional District against our former Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee. This was right after Obama got elected. In that process, I realized how much I did not know about the city of Houston. I would show up to these forums and these old women would be tearing me up. Do you know where this is? Do you know where that is? And I'd be like, no. So I decided to go get some education. And I went and took a class over at Rice on the history of Houston architecture. And this was probably 2-3 years after I bought this house. And the professor, who is the foremost architectural historian in Houston, let me audit the class. I didn't have to pay. I told him why I wanted to take it, and he was delighted to let me sit and audit that class. Through all of the school I've taken, this was the most fascinating. I would encourage any of you guys that have questions, curiosity about history, the history of Houston, to go take this class. I thought it was going to be more about architects and architectural style. What it was a lesson on how Houston developed as a city. And in case you don't know, this was a city founded and built on slaves. It was a city that at a point in time was one of the richest in the world because of the amount of cotton that's being produced, right? Sienna Plantation and down 288. Houston by the end of slavery, was the world's leading exporter of cotton in the world. And so if you ask yourself why there's so many black people here still, it's because it took that much labor to plant and pull and cultivate all that cotton. And still today, Texas is 9th in the world in cotton production. So we're sitting at ground zero. I then really started paying attention in this class. I said, wow, because what I learned was the confluence of the Buffalo Bayou and Rays Bayou is where U of H downtown is where Houston, that's the flag of Houston. And they chose that spot because that was the furthest north they can get steamship to go do a U-turn and go right back out of Galveston. If that hurricane hadn't hit Galveston, you'd be looking at New Orleans, Charleston, Houston, all situated on the Gulf Coast in Galveston, if it hadn't been wiped out. And if I have more time, I'd love to, as you can tell, I love talking about this, but once we got into the development, because now we're in 1900, right, when that hurricane came. Well, this neighborhood came up in about the 1920s, and the history of it fascinated me. Number one, Riverside Terrace, was built in response to River Oaks. And if you can think of Montrose, the Heights, even Midtown, and these houses in Midtown were considered suburbs. These neighborhoods were built before the car. And the one thing that all of these suburbs had in common was the exclusion of black people. It was in the deed restrictions, no blacks. What they did, and I wish that I was prepared for all of you today, because I've kept this stuff when I purchased these different homes, are exactly what the marketing materials would tell potential consumers. They call them intelligent deed restrictions. They didn't say no blacks. Where River Oaks took it to the next level was the exclusion of Jews. They were the only one that said no blacks or Jews. And so here comes this neighborhood, built by a set of brothers who were lawyers called the Malone brothers. And this will be my passion for the rest of my life, is to make sure that this story never gets lost. This story cannot get lost. And there's a tug of war right now about what we're gonna call it, right? There are people that are real passionate about Third Ward. Third Ward and Riverside Terrace are not the same thing, okay? And so when people start to tell you, oh, you're in Third Ward when you're actually in Riverside Terrace, all you gotta do is ask one question. If this is Third Ward, why is it that I couldn't move here in the 1920s as a black person? Third Ward is the southeast border of Third Ward is about where we're standing, right here on this corner, Emancipation Park. This was the outer southeast border of the city of Houston in 1905. And the reason that's important is because wards were not geographic areas. They were city council districts. Houston had 4 wards, a mayor and 4 wards. So it was a quadrant. And the southeast quadrant was Third Ward. This is from here all the way up to Congress and Maine. That's the axis. And so this is as far southeast as the city limits were in 1905, when they stopped using wards and started using at-large city council districts. buildings. That happened in 1905. Okay? This neighborhood just celebrated, and I'm talking Riverside Terrace, celebrated its 100-year anniversary 2 years ago, 1924. We just passed, we're into the second century of River Oaks, the Heights, Riverside Terrace, all of those neighborhoods, okay? People even get passionate about TSU and say that TSU is, hell, I've even heard people call it the University of Houston Third Ward Cougars. Neither one are in Third Ward. And what I learned in this class that was really interesting is that the same family that donated the land for U of H also was the same family that donated the land to TSU. Okay, and so, there's some good in all of this. But in 1924, the Malone brothers set out to build a neighborhood that was going to compete with River Oaks. And this was a business enterprise for these guys. This was not social studies. It was not, racism 101. They were trying to figure out how they were going to build and sell houses in this neighborhood. And so they went and bought everything from Herman Park to McGregor Park on that bayou. And between those two sprang 26 subdivisions. 26 different separate subdivisions of Riverside Terrace. The Malone brothers, actually, their homes were right there on Riverside Park. They're now tax increment apartments right now that U of H at one point had their hands on, and then they sold to some apartment developers. I really got interested in the class when we started talking about how it got here. And how it got here, and this is the part I'm truly interested in preserving, is in the 1950s was the first integration. So we went 30 years with no blacks living in Riverside Terrace, none. And one day, a cattle rancher sent his white secretary in to do a straw purchase of a home back here on Roseneath. There's a whole documentary about this called This Is Our Home, It's Not For Sale. I encourage you to watch it. And this is why this is so important. When the neighborhood found out that a black man had bought this house, they went crazy. Bombed the house, set the house on fire. Brother still didn't leave. So then they sued him and lost. They sued him saying, well, he's in violation of these deed restrictions. And then the court took the opportunity to say, yeah, but you're in a public forum asking the public to enforce these private deed restrictions, which we're going to decline to do. And not only were these deed restrictions struck, but all of them across the United States were struck on a case born right down the street. So when we just stick Third Ward on as a tag, what we're doing is excusing the very discrimination that motivated this neighborhood to be built, which were Jewish people pissed off that they couldn't move to River Oaks, cannot get a free pass when you sold these houses for pennies on the dollar because you didn't want to have black neighbors. That's what began happening in the 50s. And for those that couldn't sell their houses for pennies on the dollar, they would do things like build motel rooms. I got one on my street, the Ladette Motel. It's a red building on Riverside. Go check it out sometime. That's how this neighborhood got into decline. Some would have you believe, oh, it's because black folks started moving in. Well, that's partially true, but we didn't own anything. They owned it all. And and because of the economics, either they sold for pennies on the dollar or subdivided into duplexes, fourplexes, motels, or now we have what we have. And even now, Riverside Terrace is only about 55% African American. So it's still not correct to call it. It's okay, bro.
This is my son, so I don't even know how.
We good? So it's still not accurate to call it a historically black neighborhood. It's not. It's probably one of the more closer examples to a historically diverse neighborhood.
This is free.
I was jamming Mike all day yesterday.
Check your phones, y'all. Check your phones.
So it really wasn't until I learned all this that I got the passion. You know, at this point I was thinking law firm, and now I'm like, okay, I got my hands on a piece of history. So Fox, the professor, you know, once he found out the building that I own, came back, said, here's the architect, here's the family that built the house. Consequently, the family that built that house is the same family. The grandson owns the Lancaster Hotel in downtown, right across from the federal courthouse. And then you start getting into others that built this neighborhood, like the Sakowitz family, the Weingardens. Okay, this was very affluent, very affluent. And the crusade I'm on is we're not going to knock those pieces off the board to tell a story comfortable for us that is third ward, because you give the excuse as to how Markland got here. All right, these people left. What a great gift. You go tell you move to Markland and let us come move in here. Who got the better end of that deal? My position is we got the better end of that deal, because the only thing that separates these houses from the houses in River Oaks is landscaping. That's it. I've taken my son through River Oaks. I said, tell me the difference between any one of these houses and the houses in Riverside Terrace. Roses, Japanese yew, zoysia grass, that sort of stuff. But this was a master landscape neighborhood because the Malone brothers had in their heart that they were simply going to build a neighborhood that competed with River Oaks, that didn't discriminate against their people. So the most recent purchase that my law partner and I made is of a house that we call the Friedlander House, who was built by a man named Israel Friedlander. He was the president of First Gibraltar Bank here. The address is 2623. It sits right next door to Good Hope Church, if you know where Good Hope is. It was designed by an architect named Bernard Briscoe. And if you're into architecture, Briscoe is the man. Got books. It's the only house outside of River Oaks he built. We got. So, you know, we could have looked at it like capitalists and said, gee, these lots are big. We need to tear these houses down, put up 18 townhouses, or we can preserve a story for our kids so that they understand that, and this is just my true belief, and me and my friend were up here talking about it earlier about DEI and all that stuff. We don't need the Head Start. They do. That's why all these policies have sat in place. I asked my son, do you need a Head Start to compete with anybody you go to school with? And he looked at me, you know, and then he asked me, Dad, have you ever been subject to discrimination? And, you know, I mean, we're all black men, of course. But I looked at him and told him, no, never. I never have. Because sometimes you're gonna run across an asshole that's just an asshole to everybody. I can't assume that it has anything. But furthermore, that's their handicap. That's not your handicap. Because they want to devalue your talents. You know what you got. And so this has really been, Riverside has been for me, a way to express artistically, because there is some arts to the practice of law, but it's a little more technical than TV shows you. You spend a lot of time reading real technical rules and things like that. And so this was a way for me to express art, but more so for me to do something that's going to survive me, and hopefully something that'll survive my children, and something that'll be there, and something that we can be very proud about. There's a brother by the name of O.W. Gurley. Y'all know who that is? Gurley is the man that packed up and moved and bought the 40 acres in Tulsa. This is Black Wall Street. And it ended up with it being 2 40-acre tracts that he bought. The first was meant for commerce. The very first thing Gurley built on that 40 acres was a rooming house, hotel. The very first thing he built. Then banks, then art galleries and insurance companies and law firms and doctor offices, and all of that stuff sprang from that. And so when people look at me and want to give me some sort of credit, I ask for none of that. You know, first and foremost, I give all glory to God, but all of this has been done before. 100 years ago was a black man doing something very similar before. And so credit, no, but we certainly, and here's what I'll ask of all of you, is come by sometime and see what's going on. Because in the back of my head, you know, with the offices, I'm saying, if we could just get a few more brothers that's paying this sky-high rent in the Galleria, paying this sky-high rent downtown, and just go buy one of these, and the money you're spending downtown, you can do something spectacular to one of these places, and you own it, and we own it, and we own it, and we own it. So let's go own it.
Amen.